Hey! It's time to read again, and I'm awake. What? For now. I have pterodactyls in my innards again, so if you hear weird noises, it's just my stomach and my intesticles. I'll go back and read the last sentence that I read. Here were poor streets where faded gentility essayed with scanty space and shipwrecked means to make its last feeble stand. But tax gatherer and creditor came there as elsewhere, and I hadn't been doing that. And the poverty that yet faintly struggled was hardly less squalid and manifest than that which had long ago submitted and given up the game. That's the last I read. Now, this was a wide track for the humble followers of the camp of wealth pitched their tents round about it for many a mile, but its character was still the same. Damp, rotten houses, many to let, many yet building, many half-built and mouldering away. Lodgings where it would be hard to tell which needed pity most, those who let or those who came to take. Children, scantily fed and clothed, spread over every street and sprawling in the dust. Scolding mothers, stamping their slipshod feet with noisy threats upon the pavement. Shabby fathers hurrying with dispirited looks to the occupation which brought them daily bread. And little more. Mangling women, washerwomen, cobblers, tailors, chandlers, driving their trades in parlors and kitchens and back room and garrets. And sometimes all of them under the same roof. Brick fields skirting gardens paled with staves of old casks, or timber pillaged from houses burnt down and blackened and blistered by the flames, mounds of dockweed, nettles, coarse grass, and oyster shells, heaped in rank confusion, small dissenting chapels to teach, with no lack of illustration, the miseries of earth, and plenty of new churches erected with a little superfluous wealth to show the way to heaven. At length these streets becoming more straggling yet, dwindled and dwindled away until there were only small garden patches bordering the road by the way. I have an appointment to get my eyes checked. I should have called a long time ago. They booked up till August 2nd. So that's what I'm going. Where was I? Small garden patches bordering the road, with many a summer house innocent of paint and built of old timber or some fragments of a boat, green as the tough cabbage stalks that grew about it, and grottoed at the seams with toadstools and tight-sticking snails. To these succeeded pert cottages, 2 and 2, with plots of ground in front, laid out in angular beds with stiff box borders and narrow paths between, where a footstep never strayed to make the gravel rough. Then came the public house, freshly painted in green and white, with tea gardens and a bowling green, spurning its old neighbor with the horse trough where the wagons stopped. Then fields, and then some houses, one by one, of goodly size with lawns, some even with a lodge where dwelt a porter and his wife. Then came a turnpike, then fields again with trees and haystacks, then a hill, and on top of that the traveler might stop, and looking back at old St. Paul's looming through the smoke, its cross peeping above the cloud, in parentheses, if the day were clear, and glittering in the sun, and casting his eyes upon the Babel out of which it grew, until it traced it down to the furthest outpost of the invading army of bricks and mortar, whose station lay for the present nearly at his feet, might feel at last that he was clear of London. Near such a spot as this, and in a pleasant field, the old man and his little guide, if guide she were, she knew not whither they were bound, sat down to rest. She had had the precaution to furnish her basket with some slices of bread and meat, and here they made their frugal breakfast. The freshness of the day, the singing of the birds, the beauty of the waving grass, the deep green leaves, the wild flowers, and the thousand exquisite scents and sounds that floated in the air, deep joys to most of us, but most of all to those whose life is in a crowd, or who live solitarily in great cities as in the bucket of a human well, sunk into their breast and made them very glad. The child had repeated her artless prayers once that morning, more earnestly perhaps than she had ever done in all her life, but as she felt all this, they rose to her lips again. The old man took off his hat. He had no memory for the words, but he said, "Amen," and that they were very good. There had been an old copy of the Pilgrim's Progress with strange plates upon a shelf at home, over which she had often pored whole evenings wondering whether it was true in every word, and where those distant countries with the curious names might be. As she looked back upon the place they had left, one part of it came strongly on her mind. "Dear grandfather," she said, "only that this place is prettier and a great deal better than the real one. If that in the book is like it, I feel as if we were both Christian, and laid down on this grass all the cares and troubles we brought with us, never to take them up again." "No, never to return, never to return," replied the old man, waving his hand towards the city. "Thou and I are free of it now, Nell. They shall never lure us back." "Are you tired?" said the child. "Are you sure you don't feel ill from this long walk?" "I shall never feel ill again now that we are once away," was his reply. "Let us be stirring, Nell. We must be further away, a long, long way further. We are too near to stop and be at rest. Come." There was a pool of clear water in the field, in which the child laved her hands and face and cooled her feet before setting forth to walk again. She would have had the old man refresh himself in this way too, and making him sit down upon the grass, cast the water on him with her hands and dried it. She would have. Anyway. And dried it with her simple dress. "I can do nothing for myself, my darling," said the grandfather. "I don't know how it is. I could once, but the time's gone. Don't leave me, Nell. Say thou shalt not leave me. I loved thee all the while, indeed I did. If I lose thee too, my dear, I must die." He laid his head upon her shoulder and moaned piteously. That's a big burden, isn't it? The time had been, and a very few days before, when the child could not have restrained her tears and must have wept with him. But now she soothed him with gentle and tender words, smiled at his thinking they could ever part, and rallied him cheerfully upon the jest. He was soon calmed and fell asleep, singing to himself in a low voice like a little child. He awoke refreshed, and they continued their journey. The road was pleasant, lined between beautiful pastures and fields of corn, about which, poised high in the clear blue sky, a lark trilled out her happy song. The air came laden with the fragrance it called upon its way, and the bees, upborne upon its scented breath, hummed forth their drowsy satisfaction as they floated by. They were now in the open country. The houses were very few and scattered at long intervals, often miles apart. Occasionally they came upon a cluster of poor cottages, some with a chair or low board put across the open door to keep the scrambling children from the road, others shut up close while all the family were working in the fields. These were often the commencement of a little village, and after an interval came a wheelwright's shed, or perhaps a blacksmith's forge, then a thriving farm, with sleepy cows lying around the yard, and horses peering over the low wall, and scampering away when harnessed horses passed upon the road, as though in triumph at their freedom. There were dull pigs, too, turning up the ground in search of dainty food and grunting their monotonous grumblings as they prowled about, or crossed each other in their quest. Plump pigeons skimming round the roof or strutting on the eaves, and ducks and geese, far more graceful in their own conceit, waddling awkwardly about the edges of the pond, or sailing glibly on its surface. The farmyard passed, then came the little inn, the humbler beer shop, and the village tradesmen, then the lawyers and the parsons, at whose dread names the beer shop trembled. The church then peeped out modestly from a clump of trees. Then there were a few more cottages, then the cage and pound, and not unfrequently on a bank by the wayside a deep old dusty well. Then came the trim-hedged fields on either hand, and the open road again. They walked all day and slept that night at a small cottage where the beds were let to travelers. Next morning they were afoot again, and though jaded at first and very tired, recovered before long and proceeded briskly forward. They often stopped to rest, but only for a short space at a time, and still kept on, having had but slight refreshment since the morning. It was nearly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when drawing near another cluster of laborers' huts, the child looked wistfully in each, doubtful at which to ask for permission to rest a while and buy a draught of milk. It was not easy to determine, for she was timid and fearful of being repulsed. Here was a crying child, and there a noisy wife. In this the people seemed too poor, and that too many. At length she stopped at one where the family were seated round the table, chiefly because there was an old man sitting in a cushioned chair beside the hearth, and she thought he was a grandfather and would feel for hers. There were besides the cottager and his wife and 3 young sturdy children, brown as berries. The request was no sooner preferred than granted. The eldest boy ran out to fetch some milk, the second dragged 2 stools towards the door, and the youngest crept to his mother's gown and looked at the strangers from beneath his sunburned hand. "God save you, master," said the old cottager in a thin piping voice. "Are you traveling far?" "Yes, sir, a long way," replied the child, for her grandfather appealed to her. "From London?" inquired the old man. The child said yes. Ah, he had been in London many a time, used to go there often once with wagons. It was nigh 32 years since he had been there last. And he did hear say there were great changes, like enough. He had changed himself since then. 32 years was a long time, and 84 a great age, though there were some he had known that had lived to very hard upon 100, and not so hearty as he neither, no, nothing like it. Sit down thee, master, in the elbow chair, said the old man, knocking his stick upon the brick floor and trying to do so sharply. Take a pinch out of that box. I don't take much myself, for it comes dear. But I find it wakes me up sometimes, and you're but a boy to me. I should have a son pretty nigh as old as you if he'd lived. But they listed him for a soldier. He come back home, though, for all he had but one poor leg. He always said he'd been buried near the sundial he used to climb upon when he was a baby, did my poor boy. And his words come true. You can see the place with your own eyes. We've kept the turf up ever since. He shook his head and, looking at his daughter with watery eyes, said she needn't be afraid that he was going to talk about that any more. He didn't wish to trouble nobody, and if he had troubled anybody by what he said, he asked pardon, that was all. The milk arrived, and the child, producing her little basket and selecting its best fragments for her grandfather, they made a hearty meal. The furniture of the room was very homely, of course, a few rough chairs and a table and a corner cupboard, with their little stock of crockery and delf, a gaudy tea tray representing a lady in bright red walking out with a very blue parasol, a few common colored scripture subjects in frames upon the wall and chimney, an old dwarf clothes press, and an 8-day clock with a few bright saucepans and kettle comprised the whole. But everything was clean and neat, and as the child glanced round, she felt a tranquil air of comfort and content to which she had long been unaccustomed. "How far is it to any town or village?" she asked of the husband. "A matter of good 5 mile, my dear," was the reply, "but you're not going on tonight." Yes, Nell," said the old man, hastily urging her to by signs. Further on, darling. Further away if we walk till midnight." "There's a good barn hard by, master," said the man, "or there's travelers' lodging, I know, at the Plough and Harrow. Excuse me, but you do seem a little tired unless you're very anxious to get on." Yes, we are," returned the old man fretfully. "Further away, dear Nell, pray further away." "We must go on indeed," said the child, yielding to his restless wish. "We thank you very much, but we cannot stop so soon. I'm quite ready, grandfather." But the woman had observed from the young wanderer's gait that one of her little feet was blistered and sore, and being a woman and a mother too, she would not suffer her to go until she had washed the place and applied some simple remedy, which she did so carefully and with such a gentle hand, rough-grained and hard though it was with work, that the child's heart was too full to admit of her saying more than a fervent "God bless you." Nor could she look back nor trust herself to speak until they had left the cottage some distance behind. When she turned her head, she saw that the whole family, even the old grandfather, were standing in the road watching them as they went, and so with many waves of the hand and cheery nods on one side, at least not without tears, they parted company. They trudged forward more slowly and painfully than they had done yet for another mile or thereabouts, when they heard the sound of wheels behind them, and looking round observed an empty cart approaching pretty briskly. The driver, on coming up to them, stopped his horse and looked earnestly at Nell. "Didn't you stop to rest at the cottage yonder?" he said. "Yes, sir," replied the child. "Ah, they asked me to look out for you," said the man. "I'm going your way. Give me your hand. Jump up, master." Sweet. This was a great relief, for they were very much fatigued and could scarcely crawl along. To them, the jolting cart was a luxurious carriage, and the ride the most delicious in the world. Nell had scarcely settled herself on a little heap of straw in one corner when she fell asleep for the first time that day. She was awakened by the stopping of the cart, which was about to turn up a by-lane. The driver kindly got down to help her out, and pointing to some trees a very short distance before them, said the town lay there, and that they had better take the path which they would see leading through the churchyard. Accordingly, towards this spot they directed their weary steps. And that is all. And I'll stop there. And then we'll be at chapter 16. Y'all have a good night. It's almost 10 bells here on a Tuesday night. I'll be packing up in the morning and heading to Hannah's, so live at 5, tea with me, GrannyDee, will be at my young'uns. Hannah. Did I say Lindsay? I think I said Hannah. Hannah and Josh's. They're leaving for Tennessee, heading to Bonnaroo Music Festival. Early. And they're going to be camping in their car. As hot as it is. Lord. It don't seem like I'm getting anywhere on these do-rags. This is the one out of the Lily Sugar and Cream. And this is the other. I swear it don't look like I've done anything, but I promise I have. It just goes to a, just doing that on the edges, so it'll go into a triangle. It's taking forever, and I know I'm going to run out. This is pretty tightly packed still. And what's bad is I probably have more of this somewhere in this house. If I could get everything where I could see it. I would have to get rid of a bunch of stuff, which I need to do. I'm just blathering off. Got an earring in. Ears better. See y'all. Sleep well tonight. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye. That's it. Be sweet. Don't be ugly. Here we go.